Tales to Terrify.
Welcome to Tales to Terrify, part of the District of Wonders network, featuring Starship Sofa, Crime City Central, and Protecting Project Pulp. Everyone has a story in the District of Wonders. Come and find yours.
Good evening, children of the night. Welcome to the Nook, to Tales to Terrify. Quickly, come in and cool off. Yes, it's horrible out there. Yes, like living inside a hot, wet blanket. We are now into that period of weather over which even those who are madly effusive about the joys of summer begin to take second thought about their choices in life. Well, doff your soppy outerwear by the door, if soppy outerwear you have that is doffable, and settle into, yes, a comfy 68 degrees in here. And if you're chilled now, just wait until the sweat evaporates. It will feel wondrous and perfectly normal. A passing note here. At this week's Saturday night film gathering in the Nook, Cecilia and I entertained writer-chum B.C. Bell and his wife, Darlene Uris, with two interesting films I'd managed to miss back in 2010 and 2011. Don't laugh, but we watched Insidious, the story of which is soon to continue with Insidious Chapter 2, a haunted house film uniquely without a haunted house. More of a haunted human story, a lost-in-the-dark, out-of-body tale that throws some truly scary moments up on the screen, with some truly subwoofer booming audio stings which most of the assembly found irritating, but which I found to be okay, but mostly pointless. Kind of the horror equivalent of a laugh track. Especially when one arrived as Mahler, the ink-black you-know-what of you-know-where, was about to doze off and found himself given a sudden jolt to the central feline nervous system, and he gave me a look. And that was that for him. Overall, we enjoyed the film. Chris Bell had seen it before, but said he liked it better on a second viewing. I'll probably look in on Insidious Chapter 2 when it makes its way to Blu-ray. That, at least. The evening's second feature was a West African zombie film, The Dead, also about to experience a reanimation with the aptly titled The Dead 2, written and directed by the same British sibling team of Howard J. and Jonathan Ford who brought us The Dead. Okay, let's say I have seen better zombie acting. I've seen more compelling zombie bashing, but what I truly liked about The Dead was that it was shot in Burkina Faso and Ghana, and its two central characters, Brian, an American military engineer, the sole survivor of a plane crash as U.S. personnel attempted to flee a sudden African zombie apocalypse, and Daniel, an army deserter whose village has been overrun by the wandering dead and who now wants only to find his young son, whom he believes to have been rescued by a retreating army unit. Daniel and Brian at first are at odds, but realize finally that they have to work together to get the... Well, okay, it is a cliched situation, but within that we get a pair of excellent performances by two actors I've never seen before. And given the ever-present slow and absolutely relentless advance of the wandering dead, some excellent camera work, a clean, well-crafted script, characters you care about, and their several absolutely terrifying nighttime dashes through the bush as our heroes flee from and most likely toward the inevitable that lies just beyond their truck's headlamps. And the film creates a tense and very human drama with all that. I've said before that I'm not particularly drawn to zombie films, but this one did get to me. So again, The Dead 2 will be out in a month or so, and I'll probably catch it on another two-film bill at home with chums, cats, popcorn, and other treats. Insidious Chapter 2 and The Dead 2. Why not? By the way, don't consider this a serious critique of these films. That's not my intent. This is just what we did last weekend. Some chums and I watched 2 films that were pretty good and probably worth a rental. Tonight's story is from New Zealand, where the hobbits are. It is from Dan Rabarts, who has read to us on previous evenings in the Nook. I'm not introducing Dan's story right now, but I do want to introduce you to a project that Dan is involved with that I hope will tweak your interest. Kids are so interesting, like dipping into a tub of mixed seeds and scattering them. You never know what they're going to grow into. And in the growing, they make some wonderful leaps of rational faith as they assess facts and create hypotheses about the world and how it works. When I was a tot, I apparently purloined, for my own uses, a curtain rod my grandmother had taken down so she could wash the kitchen curtains. When she asked where I'd put it, I had no recollection either of taking it or where it ended up. After all, this was a whole day later, and all I could say at the time when pressed was that I had hidden it in a dainty dish. I hid it in a dainty dish. I hid it in a dainty dish. Later, my grandmother said my insistence had frightened her. My repetition over and over, I hid it in a dainty dish. That I remember. Dan Rabarts is putting together a dainty dish of tales called Baby Teeth. Let me quote him. Have you ever felt the hairs on your neck rise at something a toddler says, words completely out of place, rolling off their cherubic lips? Ever had that moment when a child says something that cuts you to the very soul, with no idea of what they said? Baby Teeth will be a collection of all new short stories by Kiwi and non-Kiwi international writers in order to raise money for the Duffy Books in Homes literacy charity. If you want to know more about Duffy Books in Homes, have a look at the link that I've put on the Tales to Terrify homepage. There will be 36 stories in Baby Teeth from 26 authors. The stories are based on the unexpected, creepy things children sometimes say at the most inconvenient moments. Contributors include Sir Julius Vogel Award winners Grant Stone, Alicia Ponder, Paul Mannering, Sally McLennan, Lee Murray, Cassie Hart, and Anna Caro. Baby Teeth will also have tales from the hairy mango himself, Matthew Sanborn Smith, from Jake Bible, author of the Zombie Mech Warrior Apex series of books, and many others. Most of the stories in Baby Teeth are horror, but there are also stories of fantasy, science fiction, crime, even humor. This is a collection to serve up chills, shivers, assorted, unexpected frights, nervous giggles, and often poignant reflections on childhood, life, and the terrors of growing up. Have a listen.
In a world where kids say creepy things, in a world where some other kids don't read so good, 25 authors looked at a post on Reddit, then wrote some short fiction. Buy the anthology, donate to a worthy charity, read the stories, and learn how one story really can change a person's life. From the authors who brought you too many things to list, and the editors who also arranged the cover art and distribution, the heartwarming collection of tales which will touch you in your special places. This season, pledge your heart to Baby Teeth. Bite-sized tales of terror. Rated M. Coming to an e-reader or bookshelf near you.
Okay, that's just a taste to whet your appetite for the creepiness to come. The goal of this pitch is to raise the funds to pay for an initial print run of the book, as well as an e-book, an audiobook, and hosting, and a few other fancy extras that people might like. You have until 9 p.m. on August 10th, that's New Zealand time, to make your pledge. The Books in Homes charity will use the proceeds from this project to do what it is they do, put books in the hands of kids to promote and encourage literacy and instill a love of reading in kids who may not have that advantage in their home lives. I hope you'll stop by the campaign site. It's at www.pledgeme.co.nz/1214. That will also go on our Tales to Terrify homepage. By the way, Pledge Me works in New Zealand dollars. I enthusiastically support the work done by groups such as Books in Homes, and hopefully sometime in October we'll all be able to read some great stories, and maybe sometime soon we will bring these bite-sized tales of terror to you here in the Nook at Tales to Terrify. The link to the campaign site, as I said, is on our homepage, and you can also like Baby Teeth on its Facebook page. Now, for fiction. Let me bring you back to Dan Rabarts, the New Zealand writer of horror, fantasy, science fiction, and odd things in between. Dan says he's been writing since he was old enough to hide a flashlight under his blankets and scribble stories in the back of his math workbook, because who needs math, right? Well, his fiction can be found in Andromeda Spaceway's In-Flight magazine, Aurealis, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, in the anthologies Dreaming of Jinn, Bloodstones, Regeneration, and When the Hero Comes Home, Volume 2. He's had stories podcast on the Starship Sofa, Tales from the Archives, and Wily Writers. Okay, that's enough tease. And now, a warning. Dan's story, The Bone Plate, might be disturbing for some of you, in particular you who have perhaps lost a friend or relative to cannibals. So, be warned. Here now is Dan Rabarts' The Bone Plate.
The only god I ever knew is dead. He fell, like all his demons, carved open under the pale sky. I watched his blood run black, air bubbling through torn lungs like dark rain chuckling over broken glass. He was the god of lies, the only true god. I held the knife as I stripped away his immortality, leaving nothing but agony and the same cold dusk that falls over mortal hearts. I came to pull those immortal bones from inside him and make them my own. I was his dark angel. Back in the old days, we called it the bone plate. Wasn't worth your life to touch the bone plate. The bone plate made men kings back in the black old days. Mine was a trash can lid, piled high with gnawed, soot-stained remains, the bones of rats and cats and stray dogs and pigeons. Only the bones of that which you had killed and stripped clean with your own biting, smiling teeth were allowed on your bone plate. And whoever had the biggest bone plate ruled the windswept world of trash and frost that sprawled beneath the overpasses. I remember jamming more and more bones on top of each other, wrapping them up with wire and twine and whatever else I could find amongst the trash, until my bone plate towered taller than anyone else's under the pass. It had made me king, and Hanya my queen. Hanya and I, we liked to huddle close together and watch things die. It was romantic, knowing that something had to give up its life for us to live. We pulled our ragged layers of clothing tighter and fed the fire, the flames, warmth, holding back winter's hunger, while dozens of hollow eye sockets stared out blindly over our domain from the heights of my bone plate. Far as I could remember back there under the pass, there wasn't anything magical about the bone plate. I knew there was something about it, something that mattered, something powerful. But I didn't think it was magic. Not magic the way people think of magic. A lot of folk thought it was, though. Fools. Sucking brain from a hot rat skull didn't make me some sort of shaman or give me psychedelic insights. But damn, it scared the locals, and frightened people will do just about anything you tell them. Plus, the eyeballs gave me something to chew on during those long, dark nights, when I'd stare at the slivers of sky peeking beneath the curves of the overpass high overhead and wonder what had come before the black old days. Wonder where I'd ever learned about it all. The bone plate, the rituals, the rules. Those nights when I'd wonder what the hell I was, what I had been before the world had chewed me up, stolen my memories, and spat me out down here amongst the trash and the frost and the wasted souls, where all I had was my pile of bones. And Hanya. Then one night the spooks came for me. I remember the dry scuttle of my bones scattering under someone's boots, the obligatory cloth wrapped around my face, and the black as it swallowed me whole. The spooks told me I'd been a soldier once. Said I had known how to kill a man with my bare hands, or cold steel, or from a half-mile away with the right sort of gun. Said I'd had some sort of psychotic break. Said it got ugly. It made for bad press, that sort of thing, and they couldn't just lock up a black ops crackpot in any old prison. No, once someone snapped, that was it. They couldn't even drop me in a hostile situation and put me at the wrong end of a burst of friendly fire. Because with men like me, that's a way to invite all the wrong sorts of accidents. So they'd strapped me down in a lab and bleached my brain, locked away all that nasty killing shit where I couldn't get to it, spat me out as just another homeless vet with a chip on my shoulder and a mean streak a mile wide, but otherwise harmless. It was their way of being merciful, they said. It explained why I hadn't been able to remember anything before the black old days under the pass. They'd left a gaping hole in my head where my memories should have been. Now they said that they needed me back the way I was. I guess I just looked at them. They told me that there was a man I had to kill. This man, they said, was very bad. This man needed to die. They said that they'd turn me back into the soldier I once was so that I could do it. When the job was done, they promised there'd be a nice hospital where they could fix me properly this time, and a pension so that I'd never need to work again. I shrugged. What have I got to lose? Yes, they agreed. What indeed? I woke in an alley, head thumping, everything hurting. Apart from that, I didn't feel much different. I wasn't dressed for war. No guns, no knives, nothing. Just a hunk of small bills wadded in my pocket and a business card that was blank, except for a scrawled address. Someplace in a city, a bus ride away. Took me 3 days to find Hanya. Turns out I'd been gone a while longer than I thought, and she'd had to scarp her. She'd shacked up with the sisters down in the Barrens. Greasy Pete was running things under the pass now, she told me. Threw out my bone plate and everything. I told her not to worry. We didn't need no bone plate no more. Told her we had a place to go, and we caught that bus. We had cash, real cash. So I sprung for food and coffee at a truck stop, somewhere in a high cold place where we could smell the snow coming down off the mountains. We ate fried chicken. I didn't keep the bones. No honor in collecting another hunter's leavings. Even worse, a farmer's. There's no challenge in breeding chickens for slaughter. Not like there is in trapping rats. That's survival, that is. The bus took us down to the city, where the streets crawled with vermin, most of them the two-legged kind. We beat feet to the address on the card in my pocket. "You haven't told me what happened, Terence," Anya said as we walked. "When you disappeared." I shrugged. I don't remember rightly. It had always been a good enough answer in the past. Guess it was good enough this time around, too, because she didn't ask me where we were going. As long as it was warm, and there was food, and now and then we could roast dead things over hot coals, she'd stick with me. The place was a church, or so said the sign outside. Church of the Divine Flesh. More like a halfway house that dished up salty soup for its visitors alongside some flavor of God. But it was no God I'd ever heard of. This God didn't even have a name, at least not one that any of its followers dared to speak. A God of hope, they said, which meant it was a God of desperation. Anya and me, we took to desperation like rats to a sewer. It was all going well enough, desolate God-botherers and salty broth and all, until some fool brother had the bad sense to make a move on Anya. There was no blood, just the crack of snapping vertebrae, and the brother being far less alive when I finished moving than he had been when I started. My hands remembered things that my mind didn't. That could be useful. Dangerous. After, I scanned the congregation and tried to look mean. I expected someone to call the cops, who would haul me away and lock me up darker and deeper than ever before. If it happened, I could try calling in a favor with the spooks, but they'd no doubt brand me a nut job and deny all knowledge. But I needn't have worried. Instead, a couple of the brothers efficiently scooped up the body and took it away, leaving us alone. The rest of the congregation got themselves as far from us as they could manage. That night the brothers put us on a plane south, a long way from the smog and snow of the world I used to rule with a bone fist. Drove us from the airport through the wee small hours in a minivan, the back section framed off, something heavy sliding around in there while we tried to doze until the sun came up. When we could see, we found ourselves driving through a sprawling vastness of rolling hills, tussock grass and roaming cattle. Injun country, I said, looking out the window. The brothers had brought us to an honest-to-God ranch. Not just a country home, but a ranch. Me, I'm a hunter. Way I see it, rancher's just a fancy word for farmer. No respect in farming, not from a man who survives by killing and eating his prey. A horned skull gaped over the villa's front door. Reminded me of my own little skulls, staring back at me. Seemed like kind of a blasphemy, but we were a long way from the bone plate here. Or so I thought. Soon as we dropped our things in the room where they told us we'd be staying, sun barely up over the hilltops, a house servant arrived to deliver our invitation to lunch later in the day with Victor Metzger. Victor Metzger, high priest of the flesh cult himself. Same man that the spooks wanted me to kill. I never did much believe in luck. Never believed in gods before that day either, or angels, or demons. But I'd never stopped believing in the bone plate. First thing I noticed was the plate. It was set right in the middle of the table, beside the basket that held bottles of Tabasco sauce, salt, pepper, ketchup, butter, pretty little napkins, and toothpicks. Just like some homely Southwest diner, except the table was long, polished oak, like the sort you might get the whole family around for Thanksgiving dinner. But it was just Hanya and I, sitting across from each other, looking over the plate. They brought us chilled water and warm little bread rolls and a dish of oil and vinegar, and like we were the regular swag. The first I knew about there being anything truly divine in that place was when the smell hit me. My mouth watered like it never had, the aroma of roast meat and hot gravy almost overwhelming. Then Metzger came in and sat down. I don't know what I was expecting, but Metzger wasn't it. Prophets and messiahs should have something about them, a look, a walk, a style, something that defies the ages and transcends our mortal failings. Metzger was just a dude in an expensive suit with a bad haircut. He gave us each a quick nod, not meeting our eyes, and sat at the head of the table. By the time he was seated, waiters were dishing up. Alongside steaming greens and crisp potatoes, the staff placed a plate of ribs in front of both Hanya and I, smothered in thick gravy and glistening with glaze. Metzger gave us the slightest of nods. His plate boasted a slab of steak, slowly bleeding into his potato. I guess the rebuke for killing one of his clergy was to wait until after we'd eaten. Wolf hungry, I feasted. The meat slid effortlessly off the bone. It was beef. It had the most delicate flavor of any cow I'd ever tasted. But what was I, some sort of fucking beef gourmet? Maybe it was veal. Or maybe this was just what ranch beef tasted like, on account of all that fresh air and sunshine. Might have even been pork for that matter, though I couldn't remember the last time I'd tasted anything so decadent as pork. But good goddamn, whatever they were the best ribs I'd ever eaten. I sucked the first bone clean and tossed it, out of habit, onto the plate in the center. Felt good to have a bone plate again, even if it wasn't strictly within the rules. I'd stripped 3 ribs and tossed the remains before Hanya had chewed through 1. Her hand flicked, and the bone clattered onto the plate. Metzger paused, his eyes locked on her bone lying amidst my 3. His gaze was fiercer than words, more damning than blame. That was when it came to me. Metzger understood the bone plate. The thought, and everything that came with it, almost turned my stomach. Hanya's chair clattered to the floor as she fled the room, her hands clutched to her mouth. She understood the bone plate, too. I looked from Metzger to the offending bone and gingerly flicked it back onto Hanya's plate. Not her kill, I asked. Metzger just went back to chewing on his boneless steak. I surveyed the ribs on my plate, split clean through, their true shape and size disguised by the artistry of knife and condiment. But damn, ribs had never tasted so good. As Metzger dabbed at his mouth with a napkin, he nodded at my bone plate. "It was a good kill," he said. "Or so I hear." I nodded. "Do you remember, Terence, where we met? The first time?" He forked a bloody steak between his teeth. "I don't remember much," I said. "Never really been one for small talk, me." "I heard you had a breakdown." Pale pink juices spilled over his lips. "That you were living under a bridge." I tried to laugh, ignoring the worms that twisted in my guts. "Seems you know a lot about me. Seems a lot of people do. You never forgot how to kill. You never forgot the bone plate. The cut of the knife, the stab of the fork, the scrape of steel on china." I shrugged. No harm pretending he was right. "Some things you don't forget." "I taught you its power before they took you away. I'm glad you're back." "I've been here before." Metzger chuckled, an earthy sound like water bubbling over open graves. "Not here, no. Where we met was a darker place, a darker time. It took me many years to build this. Many, many years. To ensure that what we have continues to grow, I need disciples, like you, who know the power of the bone plate. I see the bones still call to you. Do you hear them?" I nodded. I couldn't resist the call of the bones. "Good. There is more you need to remember." "More?" "It will come in time. You think you are awake now, but you are not. The bones will wake you. Consecrate them to your purpose. They will make you strong." I nodded, staring at my bone plate. No longer the gaping eye sockets of rats and pigeons. Just a cross-hatching of saw-streaked white, which had once sheltered lungs, heart. "Welcome back, Captain. Fill your plate." I wasn't hungry anymore, but the bones called to me. They can truly bring back my memories. All that the evil men have taken away, the bones will bring back, in time. I resumed eating, piling my bone plate high. In the coming days you will eat your kill until it is gone. Then you will begin your service to me. Metzger pushed away his dishes and stood. I eyed Hanya's serving, and as Metzger left I reached for the bones, for the past. Eat only that which you kill. Consecrate the bones to your purpose. In the weeks that followed, I heard the story of how Metzger had killed the steer whose skull graced the stoop, like Theseus had slain the Minotaur, strangling the beast with his bare hands. That was the power of the bone plate. Such a man could truly change the world. Metzger's god of gluttony, which measured individual value by how much one could destroy and consume, was the most honest and human thing I had ever seen in any religion. There was no room for mercy, tolerance, or pity. The Church of the Divine Flesh was founded on the fundamentals that had underscored the rise of every great empire and eschewed the weaknesses that had seen them all fail. Beneath Metzger, an army of devoted followers waited on his beck and call, ready to pile their own bone plates high in his honor. They got me cleaned up, brought me new clothes and nice shoes, ceramic blades and silenced handguns, a dozen identities. I served the Church of the Divine Flesh and its high priest, doing their work near and far. My ascendance was swift. Across the country and beyond, the enemies of the flesh cult fell to my hand. Their bodies flayed open to the sky, flaccid and broken, like some unsigned missive from beyond the gates of hell. The brothers shipped the bones which I stripped from my kills back to the ranch, where Hanya cared for them. At first, my bone plate was a chiller inside the ranch, then an underground ossuary buried in the rolling hills beyond. Yet somehow I knew that my growing collection was as nothing compared to Metzger's bone plate. It seemed like the ranch itself creaked with the grind of bones more ancient and crumbling than the man himself, brittle with ages past, broken with horrors lost to memory. Metzger had mastered the power of the bones and consecrated that power to the unholy beauty of the flesh cult, to his own worship. He had turned his bone plate into a bone empire. Where, I wondered, did Metzger draw the line between priest and god? How deep ran the power of the bones? Did it reach farther than the grasp of the spooks? A system that cast out a war hero to scrape and hunger under a windswept bridge amongst the detritus of society could not compare to the ultimate glory offered by the bones. Thus it was that I forswore the spooks and donned the mantle of darkness. Thus it was that I became Metzger's angel of death. The man sent spooks after me, but they underestimated what they had created. After enough of their assassins had found their way onto my bone plate, they gave up. Or so I thought. The media speculated on who I was, and on what happened to the bones of my victims. Was I working alone? Of course not, they said. My work was spread out across the country, sometimes across continents. I became we. Were we a militant wing of some extremist sect? Did we hail from the Far East or darkest Africa? Terror lay like a bloated corpse in the sea of questions that surrounded our motives. The false prophets of the world prayed for our souls on international television. With every kill, the power of the flesh cult grew. With every kill, every bone torn from hot sinew, I clawed back more fragmented memories. A darker place. Hot jungle, biting insects, screams in the dark. Bamboo slivered razor sharp, blood pooling around pierced flesh. Fingers digging into muscle still hot and flexing, pulling flesh back from the bone. A darker time. Make it yours by your hand. Consecrate it to your purpose. Initiation. Sacrifice. The living cling so tight to their precious ivory. Make it yours. Bones exposed beneath stubborn flesh pulsing blood. Master the art by hand, by jaw, by the bones of your own body. Only then may you take up the knife. No knives, fingers, and then teeth. Hot blood in my mouth, screams in my ears, cries that could never drown out the song of the bones. The wordless voice that calls, fills, lifts, completes. Metzger, obscured by smoke and shadow, somewhere in the back of my head. Good, Terence. Put it on your plate with the others. The plate. Ceramic, this one, its color lost beneath the swill of blood. Every hard-won trophy striking it like the ring of a celestial gong, soaking up the cries of the sacrifice. You always remember your first. Anya turned the spit, and thin grease hissed onto the coals. She had caught the rabbit herself, gutted it, skinned it. Did you know this place used to be a burial site? Hundreds of years ago. The ruins of a Mechlin temple are still up there in the hills. I stared into the glowing embers, wandering through memories I had thought lost forever. Memories that bubbled up out of my mind's murky depths with every bloody bone I cut from the unworthy. They buried the dead down in the valley, down under the ranch. While I was away, she roamed the hills, hunting, but also learning the place's secrets, its history, getting a feel for the bones of the land. Anya pulled the smoldering delicacy from the fire, tore away a limb, and handed it to me. Who are they? The ones you kill? The question was unexpected. I bit into the meat and looked over the high-rolling hilltops, chewing. The entrance to my ossuary was concealed nearby, and I could feel the pulsing warmth of all those bones stacked up together, cross-hatched, creaking. Politicians, military people, church people, Metzger's enemies. She stirred the coals, didn't look at me. You never told me how you learned about all this. Do you remember anything more about the night you disappeared? I remembered the spooks. I remembered the needles and the bright lights and the sinking dark. I remembered waking up, no longer a king but a puppet. I remembered the taste of salt and copper and treachery in my mouth. I don't remember, I said. What happens when they catch you? What happens to me? They won't catch me. They will. I don't like it here. I don't like any of this. We can't leave yet. I can. Then who will care for my bones? She gripped my hand in hers, the odd familiar shape of her pinky resting at a strange angle on my palm, the bone disjointed long ago, and had never quite healed right. Comforting at a time when I hadn't thought I might want comfort. We don't have to go back to the past, but we can't stay here. It feels wrong. I feel it. In my bones. I chewed, swallowed, decided. I never told you why I came here. You said you didn't remember. I remember, I said. She gave me a sharp look. Well? I came here to kill someone. All the devices of gods and angels and demons can be undone by the failings of men. Like Judas and his love of silver, the mighty will fall for the false pleasures of the unworthy. So it would be for the flesh cult. I had to leave for a few days, take care of some business down on the coast. I promised Hanya that when I came back we'd finish what we came here to start, and that would be the end of it. She didn't have to know that it was the man that wanted me to do this thing, to kill Metzger, and I doubted they would back me up now, not after I'd had to dismember all the agents they'd sent to kill me. Into the end, though, I was still playing their game. I'd earned the Mark's trust, just like they'd wanted, but I wasn't doing it for the man. I was doing it for Hanya. Of course, at the time, I still hadn't put all the pieces together, still hadn't figured out what Metzger really was. If I had, I would have taken Hanya, turned heel and run, even though I would have known that I could never run far enough to escape. The last time I ran from him, my only escape was madness. I wanted to call Hanya on the drive back, but she might have been at the ranch, and I didn't want anything we might say to be overheard. The only safe place we had to talk was in the high lands, or the ossuary, and it was late. She didn't like being in the ossuary after dark. The place made her skin itch, she said, like she could hear the bones whispering to her, words she didn't want to hear. So I didn't call her. Instead, I checked my guns again, checked the knives with their ceramic blades and bone handles. Metzger would be surrounded by his security men, I knew. They hovered around his shoulders and in the shadows and beyond each door like vigilant gargoyles waiting to strike. I knew them all, knew their strengths and weaknesses. They were strong, sharp-edged demons, but I was the dark angel. They would fall like everyone fell, like Metzger would fall. Metzger was eating when I found him. His lips moved over a bone, dripping juices onto his plate. He didn't stop eating, simply gestured to the waitstaff to set a place and dish for me. A cold knot of doubt twisted in my stomach. Without Metzger, I would still be scratching out a pointless existence among the trash and fumes beneath an underpass far away, chewing on rats' eyes or kicks. I would still be a ghost, living out my hours in the fog of the black old days. Now I was going to kill him, bring down everything he had created, add the power of his bones to my bone plate, because Hanya had asked me to. They brought me a plate, but even the magic his chefs could work would not distract me from my purpose. "Are you pleased with the progress?" I asked, taking up knife and fork. Metzger nodded. "Most pleased." I carved a slice of meat, forked it, chewed slowly as I scanned the room, noting where each bodyguard stood, arms crossed, hips bulging with cold metal, judging how quickly I could put a bullet in each of them or drag a knife edge across their throats. Collecting the bones would have to wait. "Where do we go from here?" Metzger asked suddenly. "The government will eventually destroy us. There is little profit in all of this, only death, however glorious." The meat in my mouth tasted sour, to hear him speaking such words of doubt. I was right to stay my course then. "Death is profit," I said. "The bones are their own reward." Metzger chuckled. "Spoken like a true disciple. Words that sound profound, yet mean nothing. Think, Terence, what is the point? We punish the weak for their weakness, the corrupt for their corruption, yet the unworthy remain in power, their own bone plates empty." Metzger dabbed away blood and gravy with a napkin. "How can we move forward when the very poisons we seek to cleanse from the world run through our own veins?" I dropped my eyes to the food on my plate. Fingers, crisped and curled gently towards the ceiling, basted and grilled in their own juices. A delicate, thin wrist. Neither the hand of a cowboy, nor a soldier. Metzger tossed a bone to clatter on the plate before him. For the first time I saw the spread of his meal. A plate with delicate strips of crispy meat on the bone, resting in an herbed garlic sauce. It was upon these that he was dining, the severed and slivered metacarpals of whomever had offended him most recently, each fried and grilled into an appetizer, worthy of the finest gourmet. Another strip of bone clattered onto the plate, gnawed clean. The monster was devouring his kill. "Do you remember now, Terence? Do you remember who you were when I found you? Do you remember the places where the bones sing? Do you remember their taste?" I stared at the plate. The bones I had collected in my months serving Metzger had brought me many memories. Memories from before the black old days, the days when I had been a killer for the dark powers who ruled from their ivory towers in distant cities. Memories of dark places, months of jungle heat and bitter cold. Brief moments of unspeakable violence, tracer fire slicing through the darkness, the hollow thump of silenced weapons, the whisper of steel in the black, singing to the aria of falling blood, the chorus of the bones. Memories of childhood, of the dark places where I had learned to hide, of the voices that had spoken to me in those places. "I remember many things," I said, forking meat into my mouth so that I didn't have to speak further. The food sat like lead in my stomach. Do you remember Corporal Johansson? My mouth stopped moving. My vision narrowed to a tunnel, scarlet mist blurring around the edges. You always remember your first. Yet until that moment, I had not remembered her. Not remembered, at least, that it had been her. Not remembered that she had been the one who had opened my eyes and my mind and my soul to the glory of the bone plate. She had fed my madness, given it a life, whether she had wanted to or not. They are always so very succulent, the ones we love. Metzger seemed to swell on the edges of my vision, something vast and ghastly in the rushing black that poured from the depths of my mind. But all I could see were the bones, scattered on the plate before me. The way you cut her open, with nothing but sharpened bamboo slivers in your own fingers. It was almost tender. Metzger went on, speaking through a mouthful of gore which suddenly seemed rank, offal spilling from between his lips like dead worms. Had I not known how much she meant to you, I would never have believed that she was your lover. But her bones, they sang the sweetest song, didn't they? Like a chorus of angels calling you in, drawing you down, into something so much deeper, so much more meaningful. I couldn't speak. I wanted to reach for my guns, unleash them into his chest, and to hell with the security goons who would cut me down before I could turn on them. All I could see was Johansson, her sweet, fine lips, her ice-chip eyes. All I could hear was her voice, her laugh, her screams for mercy. I remembered all too well. I turned to look at Metzger. The vision that had swelled in my periphery did not fade like some rage-induced nightmare. The man was no man, but a demonic apparition of bone, tooth, and claw. Organs pulsed inside its ribs, glowing with a sickly purple and green light. Rotten meat fell from between its fangs to wriggle, seething on the table. The fiend's maw moved in a gross parody of speech, while its words lanced into my brain. Sometimes we must break a heart to touch the wholeness of what lies beyond. Tell me, Terence, are you ready to pass out of your dying shell and join me in the promised glory? Are you ready to take the next step? A waiter entered the room, bearing a silver platter. He set it on the table and whisked off the lid. Despite the horror of the creature before me, my eyes were drawn down to the platter, to the steaming hunk of meat that lay upon it. I had cut open enough chests to know what I was looking at. Aorta, atrium, ventricle, sliced delicately down the center, cooked long and slow to make it more tender. Hearts can be tough, yet fragile things. This heart was small, not the heart of a warrior. I looked from that small, delicate heart to the hand on my plate, the small, delicate fingers, the gentle arching of the joints, the way the pinky was offset slightly, as if the result of some accident, perhaps a run-in with an angry dealer beneath an underpass in a wintry city, disjointed and never quite healed right. A familiar hand, one I had held on many a cold, dark night back in the black old days. And the heart to go with it. My guts clenched. My gorge rose. I felt the power of the bones, centuries of them, layer piled upon layer, locked in the earth of this hallowed ground. Hundreds, maybe more, had been laying rest here to appease the hunger of the Mecklen's ancient god, a god of dark places and desperation, a malign spirit which had not died with its people, but which had burrowed down into the soft, rotten earth and hidden amongst the bones laid there for it as a refuge, a fortress. As if the thatchwork of bones that creaked beneath the mass were reaching out to fill my head with memories that were not mine, I remembered hundreds of years of hunger, of lurking in the shadows, of whispering to the unwary, of the hollow, sweet song of wind passing through empty skulls and luring in those rare few who could hear the promise of immortality. But bones are not the key to eternal life. Bones are the warrior's strength, Courage, resolve. Bones bear up the living and remember the dead. Immortality is a darker, more elusive beast. To live forever takes heart and the breaking of such, for nothing can be won without loss. For centuries the bloodthirsty god of the vanished Mechlin people had languished, slowly gathering its power, seducing followers, growing its army, waiting for its dark angel to arise and take his place at its side. Back in those days, before the black old days, it had found its champion. It had found me, bent me to its will, broken me. I had escaped once into the haven of madness, but there would be no escape this time. Taste it, Terence. Take it, all that remains of her love for you, like you took Johansson, like you fed on her screams. Eat of her heart, and join me in eternity. The fork shook in my hand. Metzger was not just a guy in an expensive suit with a bad haircut. No man, not even an assassin, could end this being's existence with anything so banal as hot lead and razored ceramic. Eat. My chefs have done something with this morsel which I am sure you will find quite divine. Everyone knows that mortals cannot kill gods. Centuries of myth and legend have ingrained this into our psyches so firmly that even if it wasn't true, I would have no choice but to believe it. It is what makes gods gods, and leaves us mortals to bend and scrape and decay at their feet. Only other gods, or demigods, or maybe the immortal, can pierce the armor of the eternal. If I wanted to destroy Metzger, if I wanted to make this creature pay for Johansson, for Hanya, for what it had done to me. I lifted the fork to my lips. Dark red meat quivered in anticipation of my bite. It seemed to cry out to me gently, achingly, like a string orchestra sawing one long sonorous chord that echoed through my ribs and swelled inside my skull. Hanya had never tasted so bitter, nor so sweet. I chewed, swallowed, took another mouthful, and another. The power surged, trapped, desperate to be unleashed. For a moment I thought my skeleton was trying to burst free of muscle and tendon and throw itself apart. I realized that my limbs burned with pain, though I could barely feel it over the crescendo of unearthly music that filled my joints and half blinded me. Welcome to my world, Terence. I chewed the last bite, savoring the final taste I would ever have of Hanya's sweet flesh, and stood. Metzger smiled like he didn't know what was coming. Or maybe, I thought later, like he did. Like he had always known. You killed her. Metzger nodded. She was misguided. But now you see the truth. Now you can bleed forever. If not for her, if not for me, you would still be a frail thing of finite days. Now you are so much more. Yes, I said, my hands drifting to the guns resting across my chest. I am. For a time all I knew was rage. The urge to destroy was both fluid and total. The pistols barked hot and fierce, drilling holes through Metzger's security men where no holes should be. I was fast, so very fast, faster than I had ever been. In seconds they lay dead, and I was launching myself at Metzger, smoking guns tossed to the floor, a bone-handled blade in each hand. I heard the knives scream with me. Only later did I realize that I had been deceived. By then it was far too late, both for Metzger and for me. But that didn't matter, because it was already too late for Hanya, just as it had been for Johansson. All far, far too late. The god let me come, let its men die. It didn't scream as knives carved through its ribs and raked across its skull, stabbed through its eyes. It didn't scream, not even in death. This doubting god who had lived too long in the dark and that had seen, at last, that nothing ever changes. A god swelled to bloating with the ages of sacrifice, and yet who still suffered endless, devouring hunger. A God that has finally seen the world it preys upon as a thing of rot and poison and decay. A God whose taste for innocent flesh could never be sated, for there is no innocence left in the world. A God who needed to create a weapon powerful enough to complete one final, sacred task, and did so the only way it knew how, with lies and murder. A God who wanted to die forever. Before I had time to break a sweat, it was over. The God I had known, the God of lies, the only true God, was dead. I knelt in its blood, black and chuckling as it gushed from punctured lungs. I began my work. The blades rose and fell, severing skin and shearing flesh. I cut the bones free, laying them in a pile one by one. Ulna, radius, humerus. I had no bone plate to lay them in, to catch their precious juices. But these were no ordinary bones. These were the bones of a god, taken in dark vengeance by its most deadly of angels. Fibula, tibia, femur. Metzger's power, the power of the bone empire, the power of all the ancient deaths which had made it what it was, flowed into me as I tore bone after bone from the corpse. A pile of offal steamed on the floor beside us, so much waste in the architecture of mortality. Clavicle, scapula, rib. Through the haze of blood I thought to wonder at it all, at the words of doubt falling from the lips of a god, at its silence as I took its life, as though it was pleased to die. Only later would I understand these truths, that it had sacrificed my only love for the sake of its hubris, and that I was still, even in this, nothing more than a puppet in the schemes of greater, more wicked creatures than I. Vertebra, mandible, skull. I was gone by the time the spooks arrived. Later, sitting in a truck stop stirring coffee which somehow no longer smelled as strong as aromatic as it once had, I watched footage of the raid on the late news show. From on high, a helicopter relayed shaky images of the manse swarming with black Kevlar operatives. What would they think, I wondered, when they found my bone plate? What about when they began to dig down into those layers and layers of ancient dead? I didn't know if the spooks had waited for me to do my work and let me get away before they descended on the ranch, or if they had just arrived too late to catch me. Either way, I'd done their dirty work, like they had known I would. There would be no special hospital or miracle drugs at the end of this mission, however. I had walked too far into the shadow, too far beyond the brink of redemption, for them to ever take me back. But I had a new bone plate now. It was an iron chariot, a holy icon all its own, a wheeled ark of the darkest and most bloody covenant, which could make 15 miles to the gallon on the open road. In the trunk were the artifacts of power torn from this ordeal, all that remained of a treacherous god. What was I then to do with this, the makings of a new bone empire? What to do now that I was no longer a creature of finite days, now that I might bleed forever? I dropped a handful of cash onto the counter and stepped out into the night, crossing the car park as an 18-wheeler rumbled by on the freeway. The V8 coughed to life, its bass growl a fitting counterpart to the dissonant echoes of the bones and the ringing of the eternal strings in my head. I put the truck in gear and pulled out, knowing that somewhere down this black highway, somewhere down the long stretch of days that lay before me, I would find others like Metzger. The Mechlins were not the only people to feed the dark spirits with hot blood and the screams of the living, and not all those gods had grown tired of their hunger. Somewhere, someone else had a Hanya, or a Johansson, or a Krista, or a love by any other name, and somewhere there was another Metzger waiting to devour their screams and feed their hearts to the unwary. This dark angel rides the highway, and my hunger is fresh and raw. Nothing will sate me now but the blood of gods, and I am so very hungry.
Thank you for that, Dan. Dan Rabarts has been a finalist for New Zealand's Sir Julius Vogel Awards multiple times, both for fiction and nonfiction. He had a story up for the SJV Short Fiction Award this year, but the award went to Lee Murray, Dan's co-editor on Baby Teeth. Congratulations, Lee. Dan says he lurks here and there on the web at dan.rabarts.com. That's RABARTS.com. Or in the dusty corners of his house, letting words bleed across a page. His story, The Bone Plate, first appeared in 2012 in the urban horror anthology Bloodstones from Australia's Ticonderoga Press. And the idea for the story came from a competition that Dan had with his then 4-year-old son to see who could stack the most chicken bones on a plate, and from there, well, the notion went into some much darker places. The Bone Plate was read for us tonight by Jim Phillips. Jim is an enigmatic fellow. He's a world wanderer. According to Jim, he teaches people how to... Well, I think that really is a secret, so I fear you must look him up on the web to find out what he teaches people how to do elsewhere in the world. When he is not in globe-wandering mode, Jim lives on a mountaintop in Southern California, where he can be found playing in the park with his young son, bombing around said mountain on a motorbike, and musing on the high cost of his daughter's college education. Speaking of which, Jim holds several engineering degrees and claims conversational capacity in 5 languages. Enough, he says, to stay out of unwanted trouble, even though he rather enjoys trouble when it does come round. In further addition to all that, Jim is also the audio engineer in the Crime City Central neighborhood of the District of Wonders. Thanks for a fine reading, Jim. And I fear that will be that, fellow night lovers, and I further fear that it is time for you to scoot on out of the nook and into the awfulness of summer night. I don't think you have too much to worry about on your way twixt here and home. It is summer, it's hot and muggy, and the incidents of urban cannibalism notably decrease during the summer months. Human is just such a heavy meal. So, stay on your path. Avoid the... Oh, yes, there is one more thing. It is Friday, July 19, a significant date here in the district. Now, I am not fond of birthdays. After I reached 21, there never seemed to be a reason to observe any further advances in age, and I have always assumed, incorrectly, I am told, that others have the same druthers on the subject. However, July 19 is the birth date of Mr. Tony C. Smith, the father of us all here in this chaotic world of the District of Wonders. So, in keeping with the assumptive sorrow of the occasion, here is a little song to sing us out tonight. And oh, Tony, pleasant dreams. Oh,
they'll give you things you'll accept while smiling. Oh, thank you, I'm one day closer to dying. It's a day of joy and cheer, and we will sing you praises with low wood lights. Each person here will gladly raise their glasses while eating cake. We congregate in your honor. We'll laugh out loud and act real proud that you're among us.
This presentation has been brought to you by the District of Wonders Network, dedicated to podcasting the finest genre fiction. You can learn more about the District of Wonders and their many literary productions at their website, www.districtofwonders.com. Thank you for listening.